Hello and welcome to Representative Rick Larsen's Earth Day Telephone Town Hall. My name is Joe Titino and I'll be moderating tonight's call. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us tonight. We hope you find this call informative. Representative Larsen will be taking as many questions from constituents as he possibly can tonight. If you have a question, you can press star 3, that's star 3 on your phone keypad at any time, and you will be placed in line to speak with a member of our staff. Staff will take down your name, where you're calling in from, and a summary of your question. And the next time you hear your name, you'll be live on the call, and you will be able to ask your question directly. If you're streaming the event on larsen.house.gov or on Facebook tonight, welcome. You can simply type your name and question below the streaming player. And as you can imagine, we will receive a lot of questions during tonight's event, so if we are not able to address your question, please leave a voicemail after the event. You'll be prompted to do so. You can send an email to rick.larsen@mail.house.gov or call our district office at 425-252-3188. Again, if you have any questions throughout tonight's town hall, please press star 3 on your keypad or type them below the streaming player. If you would like to sign up for Representative Larsen's e-newsletter, you can press star 6. That's star 6 for the e-newsletter. Now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Representative Larsen.
Thank you, Joe, and good evening, and thank you to everyone for joining tonight for this Earth Day Telephone Town Hall. However, before I begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the ongoing crisis in Ukraine, that the U.S. does stand with the Ukrainian people and for an independent and sovereign Ukraine as well. As Putin continues his unprovoked invasion, all eyes are on the critical role NATO members and other partners can continue to play to help Ukraine defend itself, provide humanitarian aid, and increase the economic costs for Putin and Russia. At that point, last week I returned from a bipartisan congressional delegation trip to Southern Europe to review U.S. contributions to NATO's defense and deterrence mission. As part of that, met with service members from Washington State, including airmen from the U.S. Air Force 31st Fighter Wing stationed in northern Italy at Aviano Air Base, and U.S. Army soldiers stationed at Vicenza Army Garrison in Italy. And I want to report to you that they're doing well, they understand their mission, and they very much appreciate the support of their family and of the American people in the mission that they're doing. Russia's attack has felt far beyond Ukraine's borders, including by the 100,000 or so Ukrainians and Ukrainian Americans who call our own state home. And earlier this week, I met with some of the more than 180 Ukrainian refugees who resettled in Snohomish County. And we are working with refugee resettlement services to support those folks. So now, as Joe said, the theme of tonight's telephone town hall is Earth Day. Tomorrow marks the 52nd annual Earth Day. The first Earth Day in April 1970 launched a global environmental movement and ushered in a new era of landmark environmental protections. All of these happened because of the citizens' movement in our state and across the U.S. And I strongly believe, as responsible citizens, we have to continue to support and drive this movement. It starts by acknowledging that climate change is real, caused by human activity, and is a threat to public health and the environment. And I support moving the country to a 100% net zero emission economy by 2050 at the latest. And protecting the environment starts with bold and meaningful action here in our own state. In the Pacific Northwest, protecting estuaries is vital for the environment. It's also critical to our outdoor economy, which means thousands of jobs. The district I represent is home to parts of the Puget Sound and the Salish Sea, the nation's largest estuary by water volume, and its connecting rivers and streams, diverse wildlife, and marine ecosystems. And I'm working with my congressional colleagues here in the state to urge the Senate to pass the Puget SOS Act, which will provide the long-term federal investment and stewardship needed to help save the Sound. The recent bipartisan infrastructure law made historic investments in salmon recovery efforts and habitat restoration, including $172 million for state and tribal salmon habitat restoration and $89 million to improve water quality and enhance fish passage and salmon habitat. The law also authorizes $1 billion for an initiative which could help the state replace more than 400 culverts that unintentionally block endangered salmon species from accessing critical habitat, spawning grounds, and food sources. And it also makes a historic investment in cleaner and greener transportation. For instance, in Puget Sound, our ferries are a necessity. However, the state's ferry system, the largest in the country by passenger volume and fleet size, is responsible for more than 70% of Washington State Department of Transportation's annual carbon emissions. So there's a provision in the new infrastructure law that directs $250 million to help states and local governments purchase electric or low-emission ferries and construct related infrastructure. Local transit agencies like Everett Transit and Whatcom Transportation Authority are expanding their electric bus fleets as well to keep residents moving while reducing maintenance costs, lowering energy consumption, and reducing carbon emissions. The law makes critical investments in our ports, our airports, and public transit to address and repair maintenance backlogs, reduce congestion and emissions, and drive electrification and other low and no carbon technologies. So while it's important to invest in the infrastructure that had its foundation in the 1950s, I am focused on continuing the movement to a cleaner and greener transportation that will last well into the 2050s and beyond. For instance, as chair of the Aviation Subcommittee, I'm concerned the aviation industry is responsible for 9% of transportation emissions in the U.S. and 3% of the nation's greenhouse gas production. But aviation is making strides to improve fuel efficiency, to green up ground operations, and advance new and sustainable propulsion, that is engines, and Puget Sound companies are leading the way on that. But Congress has a lot more to do to fight climate change and protect the environment. It includes the investment in electric vehicle manufacturing, renewable energy and infrastructure, incentivizing utilities to switch to cleaner power generation, and establishing tax credits for things like green aviation fuels and electric vehicles to create jobs, keep people moving, and to fight climate change. So as I said earlier, none of this gets accomplished without responsible citizens like you continuing to support and drive this movement. And that's why I've asked a couple of guests tonight to help me answer your questions and hear your ideas, and I will introduce them in a moment. But if I don't get to your question tonight, please leave a voicemail after this town hall or call my office at this number, 425-252-3188. Now I want to turn to my guests for their comments. And joining me tonight to help answer questions are two people who I will introduce, and then I'll turn to each of them individually. First off is Dr. Jason Vogel, who's Deputy Director of the University of Washington's Climate Impact Group and a Bellingham resident. And Jason, are you on the call today?
I am, Representative Larsen.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll hear from you in a moment. But I also know many of folks on the call are interested in how federal and state investments are helping to build a more sustainable and resilient transportation network. So joining us from the Washington State Department of Transportation is Allison Camden, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multimodal Development and Delivery, and she'll explain what that means. Allison, are you there?
I am, yes. Hello.
Great, Allison. Thanks for joining us. So right now I'd like to turn to Dr. Jason Vogel, again, Deputy Director of the University of Washington's Climate Impact Groups. And go ahead, Jason, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Representative Larsen. Just so everyone knows who we are, the Climate Impacts Group is a small research organization at the University of Washington, and our mission is to support the development of climate resilience by advancing awareness and understanding of climate risks, so it's more of the impacts of climate change, less of greenhouse gas emissions, and supporting science-based action to manage those risks. Our shtick, if you will, is really to co-produce science. We work with communities, with managers, with decision makers and citizens on the questions they have around how to adapt to the changing conditions that we're seeing. So much of our work really happens in the background. We don't measure our success by fancy reports or publications, although we do some of that as well, but we really measure our success in how much we are helping communities to become more resilient. We've been in existence for about 25 years, working with many communities, including many in Washington's 2nd Congressional District. I just looked this up a little earlier today to get a little sense of history, and we've worked with floodplain managers and county governments in Whatcom, Snohomish, and Skagit counties. We've worked with the Snohomish and Tulalip Indian tribes and some neighboring tribes as well on climate impacts and adaptation. We've worked with the city of Everett and the Port of Bellingham, and many others that I'm sure I missed in my quick review. We also host a couple of federal research and engagement programs focused on climate impacts. One is a U.S. Geological Survey program called the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. That's really focused on natural resources, impacts to the environment. And a second program is a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration program, which is a research or CAP program called the Northwest Climate Resilience Collaborative. And that program is really focused on frontline communities, people that are getting hurt first and worst by climate change. And we have a focus on rural communities and coastal tribes. The 2nd Congressional District is really very geographically diverse. I'm here and available to answer lots of questions, but just a quick first whack at things for folks living in Island and San Juan counties. A lot of the vulnerabilities that climate change poses to you all are likely to sort of revolve around sea level rise and its effect on the coastlines, ocean acidification, and what that means for ocean economies and the flora and fauna in the oceans, but also atmospheric rivers causing floods and the possibility of fires on the west side of the Cascades in the drier forests on the islands there. And then in the coastal areas of Whatcom, Skagit, and Snohomish counties, that's really dominated by rivers and floodplains of the Skagit, Nooksack, Snohomish, and Stillaguamish rivers. And, flooding, as we saw recently in last November from changes in precipitation, melting snowpack, and atmospheric rivers are going to drive a lot of the vulnerability, as well as low flows of those rivers in the summer, what that means for salmon and orcas in the Sound, and of course impacts on agriculture. We've got some of the most productive agricultural land in the 2nd Congressional District in Western Washington. So we have lots to talk about there, but I just wanted to provide a quick introduction and pass it back to Representative Larsen.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's an excellent kind of survey, top-line survey of how climate change impacts us here in the north end of the Puget Sound. And I want to turn now to Allison Camden from the State Department of Transportation to focus now on another aspect of what we can do, and that's on the transportation aspects and maybe some of the investments that we might be seeing coming out of the state legislature's passage of a transportation bill. Allison, go ahead.
Thank you, Congressman. It's so great to be here with you all this evening. So I help lead WSDOT's Multimodal Development and Delivery group out of our headquarters in Olympia. It's a very long name. I make fun of it myself. We call it M2D2 for short. It's made up of 11 divisions, which includes our core engineering divisions like construction, maintenance, safety, and transportation operations, as well as our modal divisions like public transportation, active transportation, rail, and aviation. In M2D2, we are really focused on finding integrated multimodal solutions to our transportation challenges, and I really think of it as the policy hub of the department. So at WSDOT, we are very excited, very, very excited to begin implementing both the federal infrastructure law and the Move Ahead Washington transportation package signed into law by Governor Inslee last month. Move Ahead Washington leverages the federal infrastructure law funding that's coming to Washington State for the transportation portion of that law, and we leverage that to provide a transformative approach to our statewide transportation system with historic investments in hybrid electric ferries, zero-emission buses, electric vehicle infrastructure, fish passage culverts, and transit biking and walking projects and grants. I could list a long list of all the investments that are coming our way, but in that package, it's a 16-year package with $17 billion, and it's really providing just historic levels of investment in green transportation solutions. So I look forward to hearing folks' questions, and I will do my best to provide answers.
That's great. Thanks so much. We're going to get started, but I'll turn over to Joe Citino in a moment to facilitate the call-in questions, but I have a question for Dr. Vogel to start, because you mentioned the term atmospheric rivers. Last November, we had these horrendous floods in mainly focused in the Nooksack, but certainly in the Skagit River as well. I had not heard the term atmospheric river before. So the question is that a new term? What is an atmospheric river? And what does science say about its cause? Should we expect them again? And what do we do about the immediate impacts? It's really 5 questions, but you got about a minute to answer them.
Well, I'll keep it short so you can get to your constituents as well. Well, your other constituents, since I am one of them. Yeah, atmospheric rivers are an atmospheric phenomenon where warm, moist air from the Pacific Ocean is kind of picked up by the upper atmosphere and, kind of shot long distances and tends to hit us here along the coast. And when it hits our land masses and the mountains here, a lot of that moisture just dumps right out of the warmer air. It is something that's happened for a very long time, but this was a particularly severe example of it. It's actually something that has been a big problem in Seattle for a long time. Whenever they have an atmospheric river, they tend to have their combined sewer system overflow, and you can imagine the kind of problems that causes. But we should expect them to continue. And as the temperature warms, it's likely that more moisture will travel in those large atmospheric rivers.
And what do you do about the immediate impacts?
Well, there's a lot to be done based on just what we've seen happen very recently, right? Some of the big challenges, however, are that we've done a lot of historical development in the floodplains. And then a lot of the floodplain itself has been turned into agricultural land. We've narrowed some of those riverways. So there's a lot of opportunities in restoring some of those wetland areas, in relocating critical infrastructure out of floodplains, and not doing additional development that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But at some level, if we're going to live next to rivers, there's going to be some risk of flooding no matter what. So there is a mixed bag here.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. It's really topical because a lot of folks I represent had to deal with that last year. Hey, so thank you. And Joe, if we could get you started, go to Joe Citino to moderate questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative Larsen. Again, everyone on the phone, feel free to press *3 at any time if you have a question, or press *6 to sign up for Representative Larsen's e-newsletter, a great way to stay informed. I also want to encourage everyone to follow Rep. Larsen on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. But we are going to go to our first caller on the line, is Judy Schneider-Wallace, who is on the phone. Judy, you are now live on the call.
Hi, Rick. It's Judy. How are you?
Hi, Judy. Thanks for calling.
I know. So I'm in this new role as being a middle school teacher over at Everett Virtual Academy. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, but that's great. Congratulations.
Yes. So I'm teaching middle school science, and my students have been so excited. We've been looking at climate change. And my question for you is, I'm listening to you, and I see so many things that you're doing, which makes me so excited. And my question for you is, would you be able to come and talk to my students?
Yes, I can. It depends on schedule. It depends on a lot of things. But I think if you or anyone on the call wants to have me come speak, to contact my office, and we'll try to get something scheduled to do that, so I can come do that. I'd have to be well prepared, and I might bring Dr. Vogel along so he can answer the science questions.
I know. These guys are good. These guys are really, really, really good. And so, but I've been teaching them about activism, which you know that I'm very much involved. So that is pretty much my question with it, is that we would like to have you involved in as an Everett public school teacher, we want to make sure that with science that we are doing that. And thank you so much for having this tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. Appreciate that. Joe?
Yes, we're going to take one question from online. It's from Ken. He is asking, what is being done to include hydrogen in an alternate future fuel?
I can. This is Representative Larsen again. I'll speak to that, and I would ask the two guests if they have some additional things to say. There is the effort to turn the research in using hydrogen as a fuel, turn that into reality. Just today, I was visiting the PACCAR Technical Center in Skagit County. PACCAR makes trucks, big semi-trucks, and they are doing both the next generation of probably the last version of diesel engine trucks to make them more efficient while they're working on electric powered, electric drivetrain semi-trucks and hydrogen fuel cell trucks. And I think you have to think about the transition sort of in that order, like current fuels, then to electric, and then to hydrogen. Another area where that's taking place is in aviation, where you have the current type of aviation fuel being used, and then we're looking at sustainable aviation fuel and providing tax credits and incentives for that, and that will reduce emissions in aviation fuel. But there's a company in Arlington, Washington, my hometown, that is building an electric powered aircraft. Certainly not as big as a 737, but it's about a 12-seater, and there's been articles written about it in the paper. And they want to get from a 12-seater to something larger to do regional trips using electric-powered aircraft. And there's the next step, which is hydrogen propulsion aircraft, and there's a lot of research being done in that in the state, as well as around the country and in Europe. And so that's kind of the order of things when it comes to hydrogen power. Dr. Vogel, do you have some thoughts about that?
Well, I think I would probably defer to our transportation expert for any sort of energy response.
Sure, great, yeah. Allison Camden, do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. Building off of what you shared, Congressman, we do have some transit agencies in Washington State who are exploring hydrogen. Lewis County, the Twin Transit down there comes to mind. The Move Ahead Washington package did create a sustainable aviation grant program that WashDOT is setting up along with the Department of Commerce. And then the legislature passed a separate bill that creates, just this past session that just ended, that creates an Office of Renewable Fuels, and that will build on the 2021 state energy strategy that the Department of Commerce led, but other agencies like WashDOT were a part of. And that office is going to complete a feasibility study, look at the highest and best uses for renewable fuels in hard to electrify sectors like maritime, industrial, heavy transportation, and that will include hydrogen.
Yeah.
So there's a lot happening in that sphere.
A lot happening. I know it's still early, and not a lot of it has been necessarily implemented, but it is happening. And I know that in talking with folks in the industry, they see it as very real as well, not just a science project, but very real. So, thanks, Ken, for that question. Appreciate it. Joe?
Yes. Next up will be Peter on the line from Everett. Peter, you are now live on the call.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Representative Larsen, and everyone for hosting this call. Appreciate it very much. My question is there a plan or a roadmap that's being followed to combat climate change? And I ask that because some things maybe we're not doing may make sense to do, but it's not clear why. And some things that are being done seem to maybe make sense or not, but it's not clear why. So I was wondering, is there some kind of plan, a roadmap that everybody can be following? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let me take the first crack at that. but actually I'd like to have Dr. Vogel sort of do a quality assurance check on what I have to say, and it's okay if I'm off base or wrong, Dr. Vogel. I'd like to hear what the science would say what the roadmap should be. But first, I talked about the transportation investments that we're making from the federal level in order to address some of the biggest concerns in transportation emissions. One of the next steps Congress needs to take is to pass historic climate change legislation, which was part of something that used to be called the Build Back Better Act. It'll probably have a different name, but that part of that act, that bill is still alive, and if we're able to pass it, would be the largest investment in fighting climate change that's happened in the United States, with packages of incentives, tax credits, and regulatory actions in order to begin to continue turning the corner on the fight against climate change. But it has been criticized as not being big enough and fast enough, and certainly I would accept that criticism, but it still is very big, and I would like to ask Dr. Vogel if you've had a chance either to look at what Congress has done, and it's okay to be critical, just get in line and criticizing Congress. If you have some assessment or what you think the science says the roadmap ought to be.
Well, thanks for the question, and I think that it's valuable to think about what we should be doing, like what is a roadmap for what we should be doing about climate change, as asking really two different questions. And one of those questions, which you were just addressing, Representative Larsen, is, what should we be doing to reduce the carbon intensity of our economy, broadly speaking? That's transportation, that's power production, that's energy use in our buildings to heat them. There's many ways that can be tackled, and there's a lot of policy ideas. I would note there's a lot of action that can be taken at the local level. People in communities and cities and in your own household, making choices about riding a bike to the grocery store instead of a car when you can, buying an e-bike. Those things are getting pretty cheap and useful too. But that's not really my area of expertise. My area of expertise is the second way that we should be thinking about what we can do, which is how do we prepare for the changing future? Because there are things that have already changed. We've experienced some of those changes, but more pronounced in places like the Arctic, or if you look at glaciers in the Cascades, that's a place where you can see these changes literally happening if you look at the flows in some of our rivers. And some of that change is going to continue. It's sort of baked into the climate system based on emissions that have already happened. And there's a lot we can do to prepare for that. Again, some of that may need to happen at the federal or state level, but a lot of it can also happen in communities by citizens deciding to do things the way that Earth Day really started, right, which was citizen activism and taking that leadership role. So there's a lot to talk about there. I don't want to hog the time, but just wanted to mention those two major paths are both worth looking at.
Yeah, thanks. And Allison, how's the transportation package fit into the state's roadmap to contribute to the fight against climate change?
Yeah, well, the state's got an energy strategy that's focused on near elimination of the use of climate-threatening fossil fuels by 2050, and WashDOT has certainly an important piece of that. Electrifying our transportation system is a big focus, and funding in both the federal infrastructure law as well as Move Ahead Washington to invest in building electric vehicle charging infrastructure along our designated corridors is really going to help get us there. The legislature, through Move Ahead Washington and last year's transportation budget, have also funded us to develop a mapping tool to really be very strategic in where we're putting in those electric vehicle charging stations. We've also got work we're doing around reducing vehicle miles traveled. So we want to get folks who are able to drive and want to drive, and that's their choice. We'd love to get folks into electric vehicles At the same time, not everyone can drive. There's 24% of Washingtonians can't drive. Either they're too old, they're too young, or they're disabled. And so for folks who choose not to or can't drive, we'd like to get them onto buses that are zero emission. We'd like to get them onto safe biking and walking infrastructure and really help bring down our vehicle miles traveled to help combat climate change that way as well.
Yeah, thanks. Peter, thanks for that question. I know that it's probably not laying out the entire roadmap. As Dr. Vogel said, it'd be a longer conversation, but I think these are, the parts of a bigger roadmap, and I know the state of Washington is working within, as Allison Camden said, working within a framework focused on reducing emissions. And so, but thanks for the question very much. Joe?
Yes, next up on the call will be Mary Lou from Bellingham. Mary Lou, you are next up on the call.
Okay, thank you for hearing us. My question has to do with continued logging by the DNR, selling mature forests to be logged when right along in Whatcom County, especially at this time when we've seen severe flooding last year and more trees out not only contribute to flooding, but the washing away the soil of our good agricultural soils in Whatcom County, and their wildlife corridors and their places for hiking and walking in closer toward the urban areas than way up toward Mount Baker or something like that. And I'm wondering, and it affects the air pollution if we cut down all our trees. So I'm wondering what can be done looking at a bigger picture. Even though I've contacted DNR, it doesn't seem to make any difference. What suggestions do any of you have, and how can we look at the big picture of how each decision affects more than just that one area? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Lou. And I will have to say, unfortunately, I don't have anything to offer on that except to pass your question on to the Department of Natural Resources. And although Allison Camden is with us tonight, she's with the State Department of Transportation, not with the State Department of Natural Resources. I am going to be with the President tomorrow. He will be in the state, and he will be signing an executive order in the morning on the logging or ending the logging of old growth forests. That's about as much as I can say about it. So at the federal level, I know this administration is focused on this issue, but I really can't answer for the Department of Natural Resources, and I don't know that either of the guests can either. I'm sorry, but that's a great question, and we'll make a note of it and see if we can get an answer from the department and get back to you.
Right. I understand these are not quite the legal number for old growth, but they will be by the time they're logged, and they're mature trees and mature forests. So thank you for considering.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Lou. Joe?
Yes, I'm going to introduce a survey question. We're going to have one survey tonight, and then we'll go to our next caller on the line. Our survey question tonight is just to know where everybody is calling in from tonight. If you're in Snohomish County, you can press 1. If you're in Skagit County, press 2. Whatcom County, press 3. Island County, press 4. And I'm sure you can guess what number 5 is. San Juan County, press 5. And if you live outside the 2nd District, you can press 6. And we'll update the audience on survey results pretty soon. But next up is going to be Eric on the call. Eric, you are live.
Hey, Representative Larsen. I was down in Carlsbad, California. I talked to a gentleman. They've legalized electric golf carts down there. He bought a used golf cart for $1,500, did a little work to it. Max in, it was $3,500. You have a little wall charger that goes into a 110-volt regular outlet in your house. He goes everywhere. He loves it. You can get him with covers, so it protects you from the rain wind, whatever. They go well in the snow. Elon Musk said that if you took part of Utah, 200 kilometers square, and put a solar farm in there, you could power the whole United States. That's what he said. California, when this golf cart program started, it was $20 to register your golf cart. They saw everybody was doing it. They raised it to $120 for state registration. And I noticed that when we had the pandemic and everybody stopped driving, the air was so clear up here. It was so crystal. It was awesome. What can we do this in Washington State? Can we do this nationally? What's your answer, sir?
I haven't thought any about legalizing golf carts. I haven't heard of the California program at all, and so I'll look into it. But I've asked Allison Camden from the state. Has there been any discussion about that for our state?
I have not heard a discussion about electric golf carts specifically. Certainly, there are certain roads where those could make sense, and other roads that they wouldn't make sense safety-wise. But that's certainly something we can look into and follow back up with your staff.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks, Eric, for the idea. I just have not has not come across my desk once. So appreciate you bringing it up. Joe, before we go on, I had a question for Dr. Vogel a little bit, because the questions we're getting are great, and they're kind of localized, practical, and I think when we talk about fighting climate change, that term "act global" or "think globally, act locally" is important, and we're hearing a lot about that. But can you talk about about the think globally part on climate change and what the science says about some of the bigger things that either we need to do, or what some of the bigger climate change impacts are to the Northwest?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question, Representative Larsen. It's a pretty crazy open scope question, so you might have to steer me in the right direction if I go off the rail a bit. But certainly climate change is a global phenomenon, right? And that's basically when we emit greenhouse gases. You drive someplace, gas, emissions come out of your tailpipe, it goes into the atmosphere, and it more or less spreads out all around the entire planet, right? So when we emit something here in the Pacific Northwest, it's going to affect people in countries all over the world, and the same vice versa, right? So if we clean up our act here in Washington State and people aren't cleaning up their act somewhere else, we're not going to solve the problem. So that is why thinking globally is important. I'm being billed as a scientist here, but I want to be honest, I'm actually a policy scientist. I've got a master's in atmospheric sciences, and then I moved into public policy and social science. And I'd say that there's a lot of strength in the thinking about our region and thinking about the levels of governance where we have influence. So obviously, Representative Larsen, you have a lot of influence compared to the rest of us at the federal level, and coming up with ideas and lending support to the ways that the federal government could address these issues. Some of us might know people that work in state government, or might have connections to state agencies like DNRs, as the previous questioner asked, and that's a place to make a difference. But in the Pacific Northwest, we live in a region of great natural abundance. Our electricity supply is dominated by hydroelectric power. So compared to most places, we actually have pretty clean electricity. So when you start thinking about what can we do here, the world may need to clean up its electricity supply, but we're doing pretty well. That's a great reason to focus on transportation if you're thinking about how to make a difference in the Pacific Northwest. And then, on the impact side, I think it's irreducibly local. The impacts that we, even within the 2nd Congressional District, I think are going to be significantly different. If you live, along the Skagit River and are in a floodplain, that's going to be a major issue that we need to adapt to, and entire communities need to struggle with what that means and how to maybe have rolling setbacks and protect themselves from major events. But again, if you're in San Juan or Island County, that kind of flooding is not going to happen, right? But sea level rise is a different risk that could affect important assets and considerations there. So I think maybe the big picture is that if we think too much about the global problem, we kind of miss the opportunities that are close to home. And so those close to home opportunities are where I would encourage people to really focus their attention and try and make a difference.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. By the way, this is Rick Larsen again. I appreciate you have a PhD in public policy, but you have one more master's in science and atmospheric sciences than Allison Camden and I put together. So we will defer to science to you on science as well. So, Joe, do you have a fair enough? Yeah, great. Yeah. Joe, do you have a next caller?
We do. We have Toby out on Orcas Island. Toby, you are now live on the call.
Great. Hi, and thanks very much, Rick. This is a terrific program you're putting on. Here in San Juan County, we have just recently created a new department of the county government on climate and sustainability, and that department has a citizens advisory committee called the Advisory Committee on Climate and Sustainability. And I'm not on that committee, but I have good friends that are. This is a small town, Yeah. And I'm wondering, as I was listening to your thing, I'm emailing somebody on another topic who just happens to be on that new committee. And I'm wondering if I can give him some referral names that at the state or even federal level that can help this committee, this advisory committee, do a better job. Because all the topics that you're talking about on this call, about the roadmaps and grant making and lifestyle ideas, and that's the choices we can make, and all that's what this committee is going to be focused on. So there's probably wonderful people out there. Maybe some of the people on this call, and I came in after they were introduced, so I don't have names or whatever for them, but just give this some thought. If there's people that you think can help this advisory committee do a good job, I'll pass those names along.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Toby. I appreciate that call. For folks who came on the call late, our two guests are the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the State Department of Transportation, Allison Camden, and her focus is on multimodal development and delivery. So think transit, think bike paths, think sidewalks, walkways, and a variety of other areas. And then Dr. Jason Vogel, who's a Deputy Director of the University of Washington Climate Impact Group, who's also a resident of Bellingham, and he looks at the impacts of climate and climate change. Well, so that's just a review for everybody. Can I go to Allison Camden on that question? Just speaking broadly, is there someone at the state DOT that focuses on climate and sustainability? Is that you? And then as well, is there somebody, say, in the governor's office outside of the DOT or in another agency where that function is located, and maybe we can do some outreach to connect those folks to the group in San Juan County?
Yes, our climate work at WashDOT is under me, and so I can be absolutely a contact, and I can then plug in our subject matter experts, one of whom is brand new, and another where we're going to be hiring. So absolutely, and I'm happy to provide my email now, or your staff can follow up with that, whichever is easier. The governor is very well staffed on climate, and there's a handful of staff working on climate and energy in tandem. And I'd be happy to talk with them about who the best contact might be. And they've got their Northwest region person whose name is escaping me, but then they also have policy experts in the office. There's also some great staff at the Department of Commerce and the Department of Ecology. And so I've got a variety of names kicking around in my head, and I'd be happy to talk to folks on our interagency team here to figure out the right contacts to provide.
Okay, this is terrific.
But I can read out my email address if you would like. That's
please do, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
go ahead, Allison.
Camden. Yeah, Camden, C-A-M as in Mary, D-E-N as in Nancy. So Camden A at wsdot.wa.gov.
Wait, Washington State, WSDOT dot
W-A.
W-A dot law, you said?
Gov, G-O-V.
Dot gov.
Gov.
Okay. Camden A at wsdot.wa.gov. Perfect. That's terrific.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. This is great. You guys are great, all of you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Toby. Appreciate it.
Representative, would it be okay if I made a couple of additional suggestions there for that comment?
Yeah, that's great. Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, just there's actually a tremendous amount of activity going on at the local level, and a lot of people are asking the same question, like, who do I talk to make sense out of this or to get a first step? A couple of organizations that you might look to that are really like umbrella groups that are connecting lots of communities with each other. You might look at the Association of Washington Cities. They have a very strong climate program that's connecting, as you can imagine, Washington cities, but they have a strong emphasis on smaller communities. They're not really looking to serve Seattle or King County or Tacoma. They're looking to serve smaller communities that need assistance. The Urban Sustainability Directors Network is a great network of people who are professionally involved at the local level on sustainability issues, and they have a large professional network, and they produce a lot of really interesting insights. That would be a great place to look. And then just because you're on an island, I would recommend the Bainbridge Island actually did a comprehensive planning effort that integrated climate change and sustainability throughout all of their comprehensive planning efforts. And you can look that up. Just Google search that and see what they were able to do. That was only maybe 5-ish years ago that they did that. And it's sort of a model that might be replicated at the state level now as the State Department of Commerce is looking at requiring climate elements in comprehensive planning as a possibility. So there's a ton more I could say, but I don't want to take up the rest of the time. That's an inkling of where you can start.
Great stuff. That's great. Thanks, Toby, for the question. And I look forward to seeing my friends at Orcas Island soon enough. Great. Joe.
Yes, just want to give a quick update on our where folks are calling in from tonight. 44% from Snohomish County, 20% Whatcom County, 17% Island County, 10% Skagit County, and including Toby, 7% from San Juan County. And Alan, we do see you submitting your question. You also are in Snohomish County, so if you were able to add in, it would bump up those Snohomish County numbers. But next up, we are going to go to Mariah in Marysville. Mariah, you are live on the call.
Oh, hi. I was wondering about, first, I've got two questions. One's about plastic and one's about the transportation. First of all, the plastic, I was wondering if you guys have heard of the Break Free from Plastic bill that's going, or act that's going around right now. What's being done to put pressure on the oil companies to take responsibility for the plastic situation that they've caused instead of shunting it off onto the consumer. And also wondering what we are doing with the plastic that we currently have, like what science progress has been made to recycle it into reusable materials. And then I was also wondering about the hemp plastic that's currently coming out, if there's been support for commercial composting facilities for those.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, that's a lot.
Yeah, is that it? Did you have a transportation question?
And my transportation, yes. I was wondering if trains and high-speed trains are being included in the plan with the $17 billion. That's really great to hear, is that we have that much to spend. And what the outreach to rural areas with that, because for me, I've grown up 15 minutes from any kind of civilization by car. And then also what we are going to do with the cars that are already present, how they're going to recycle those.
Yeah. Okay. I can answer a few of those questions, and thanks. So first off, it's the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is in Congress. I am a co-sponsor of that bill.
Oh, wonderful.
And 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I forget, we also passed the Save Our Seas Act, and that became law. And that was somewhat the first step that was taken to get some control on plastic pollution that ends up in the oceans. There's an effort to now try to internationalize that. Because of, again, it gets to Dr. Vogel's point about thinking globally. Just as much as diesel emissions or car emissions, transportation emissions end up in the atmosphere and circle the Earth, plastic ends up in the oceans and circles the Earth. And we do we don't do a decent job in the United States, but we do a lot better job than some countries around the world in controlling plastic pollution. And so the next step is to sort of think about what we can do to encourage plastic recycling and actually reducing the use of plastics, not just here in the United States, but around the world. And so that's the sort of the second stage of the Save Our Seas bill that's making the rounds on Capitol Hill right now. But I'm a co-sponsor of that bill. I don't have a really good answer for you on the reuse of plastics or on hemp plastic. I do know at Western Washington University in the district a couple of years ago, and it's still going on, I did visit one of the research labs where students there are doing research on how to reuse plastics that are recovered from the oceans. And so it's certainly local in terms of these ideas that people are coming up with, and it is national in terms of ideas that people are coming up with to reuse plastics in order to cut down the use of and creation of more. On transportation, the federal transportation bill that the bipartisan infrastructure law we passed and the president signed last November includes $65 billion over the next 5+ years for the investment into rail, including into Amtrak, both in the Northeast corridor, that is the Washington, D.C. to New York corridor, to make major investments in that corridor to increase the use of Amtrak and to increase the speeds. And then, as well as part of that bill, is our dollars to support what we call state-supported rail, and the Amtrak system in Washington State that runs from Vancouver, BC, across the border through Bellingham down to Seattle. The Amtrak Cascades is one of those state-supported programs, and we approved more federal dollars to support the Amtrak Cascades, as well as in other states with their state-supported programs, in order to make those investments to increase the use. And now that we're not all the way through COVID, but we're through COVID enough that the Canadian border's back open, largely, then we can get our Amtrak Cascades reintroduced by rail, and people can start using it. But Allison Camden, do you have some thoughts on high-speed rail?
I do, and thank you, Congressman, for all of your efforts with the federal infrastructure law. The funds for our Amtrak Cascade service are hugely important, and we are right now conducting a service development plan to map out what the future of that service is going to look like. At the same time, we have been doing work on ultra-high-speed rail. Going back to 2017, we've completed a feasibility study, a business case analysis, and then in 2020, we completed a framework study that looked at what a governance framework could look like, because it is an international, Vancouver, BC, down to Oregon, so international, and then 2 states for a new corridor for ultra high-speed rail. We've done that work as well. And then in the Move Ahead Washington package, the legislature provided us $4 million to restart that work with BC and Oregon. And they also provided $150 million that we can use towards match for competitive federal grants. To the Congressman's point, funding that was just provided in the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed, that there are some great grant opportunities that we are looking at there. So we have just, that law has just been enacted, and we are getting together with our counterparts in BC and Oregon to talk about what the scope of that work is going to look like. But to the question around outreach to rural areas, we're going to start first and foremost with a really robust community engagement strategy that looks at equitable engagement and early and often engagement up and down the corridor, to really meet people where they are and talk to them about what they'd like to see and what their concerns might be. So we're going to start with that community engagement, but also look at developing a federal grant application to really get going on planning work. So we haven't actually started a project, but we'd like to get the planning work and some of the early environmental work done. But that'll take a number of years, and we want to start with that community engagement.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Before we go to the next question, I want to thank the over 3,700 people who have participated in this phone call for anywhere from 5 minutes to the full time, and as well as the current 470 people who are still on the call, which is many more people than show up at any of my in-person town halls in the past, except for 1 or 2 of them around 2009 and 10. So, with that, Joe, we'll go to the next question.
Yes, we're going to take a question from online from Bradley. He says he's a middle school teacher now in Edmonds and before in Darrington. He says he would like to see job training for young graduates to learn how to electrify, weatherize, or solarize homes in their community. Has any training been planned?
Yeah, thanks, Bradley, for that question. In fact, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW union, has a program that does train apprentices to install solar and as well to install electric vehicle charging devices in homes. And so it does exist, and for those folks who are interested in a good-paying, long-term job, I think calling your local union and applying to become an apprentice in that field is a good bet for the long term, because I think, as Dr. Vogel would probably agree with me, the impacts of climate change are going to be with us for a while, and we're going to be needing to invest for a long time in dealing with those impacts.
I do agree.
Thanks. A 2-foot putt for you, Dr. Vogel. Joe, go ahead.
Yes, so next up we're going to take a call from the phone lines from Howard and Everett. Howard, you are now live.
Hi, this is Howard. Thanks for taking my call. I'm a self-employed person, and I have to do things with my own vehicle, and the traffic is getting worse and worse on I-5, especially during rush hour in the mornings and in the evenings. What is going to be done about that? And I also understand that after the roadway for I-5 was put in, they were talking about doing a double-decker or upper and lower, which never went into effect. Why was that? and can that be done at this time?
Thank you. Thanks, Howard. On the second, this is Rick Larsen. On the second point, I have not heard of that history on I-5 to build a double-decker or viaduct system here. So I really can't speak to that. With regard to traffic congestion along I-5, I agree. It's pretty miserable. It's pretty tough, and that's why investing in a variety of transportation modes is important. There's work that is just getting started on Interstate 5 north of Everett to create the new interchange at Marysville that should, over time, help facilitate people leaving the highway, leaving I-5 at Marysville. That would hopefully then loosen up traffic going north. The transit station at Linwood is due to be done within a year and a half, and I think that is going to be a very successful project when it's done. A lot of use out of that, taking cars off the road, but getting to Linwood and parking there is going to be a challenge because there'll be so many people going to Linwood and parking there. But that will take a lot of cars off the road. We also broke ground yesterday on something called the Orange Line. It's a bus rapid transit investment. So community transit has these bus rapid transits, which basically operate like a train on wheels. And they're not for I-5 as much as they are for the surface streets, but it helps keep people, give them a better choice to use their cars, to not use their cars going through the communities, and thereby providing some opportunities and other choices for people to use so they don't have to use their cars. So for someone like you, Howard, who's self-employed and maybe has to use their car, it over time will free up some space on the roadways for you. But those are some of the thoughts I have. And again, I think it's tough to be patient. It's going to be tough to be patient to get all this work done, but the investments are there to get it done. Allison, could you maybe update us on the Marysville 529 Highway 529 exchange where the work's been kicked off?
I'm not super familiar with that exact project, but looking at our website, we are funded for $92.5 million worth of improvements, and we're currently in pre-construction, so construction has not started, but that work will be going on between now and 2024 is what it looks like.
Oh, okay.
But because I'm not an expert on it, I don't want to
sure.
overspeak my knowledge. But I can add that the legislature just funded us to begin an I-5 master plan. We've really been addressing I-5 in one-offs. And where I-405, we developed a master plan back in 2002, and we've now been making investments into I-405 since then. We're now going to be able to do that for I-5 border to border. So we just got that funding and direction up to $35 million over the next 16 years to invest in a plan. And what that will allow us to do is look at the entire corridor, what's working, what's not, and develop both low cost, medium cost, and high cost solutions, as well as short term, medium term, and long term. So we'll be able to identify quick fixes that can help get folks moving, along with those longer term, more expensive projects that take a little bit more time to put together.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the question, Howard. Again, it's hard to counsel patience, but the investment, the plans are there, and more importantly, the money behind the plans are finally there because of the federal bipartisan infrastructure law that we passed, and because of the transportation plan that the legislature passed. So thanks, Howard. I think we have time for one more question, Joe.
Yes, and I do want to remind everyone, I will remind people when Representative Larsen is done, a way that you can leave a voicemail or you can contact our office. I know there are several questions up here. Can't get to all of them tonight, but I will go to Michael up in Anacortes. Michael, you are now live.
Yes, thank you, Congressman Larsen. I want to first just say thank you for all the work that you've done federally and for our state. First say that I am a supporter of a strong military, but given that and that the military is known to be one of our largest polluters in the country, if not the world, what are we doing to combat the carbon that the military is putting out there?
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question. I appreciate it. First off, I would note that it is important that from a national security perspective that our own Department of Defense does in fact recognize climate change as a destabilizing factor in the security of countries around the world, as a destabilizing factor that could have impacts to the U.S. national security. And you have to start there with the DoD, with the Department of Defense, because that destabilizing factor could cause the United States problems if countries end up being failed states, or if they otherwise become destabilized because of the impacts of climate change. So that's an important principle. It's in the national security strategy of the United States. It's outlined as a major concern. The second thing I note is that during the presidency of President Obama, we were starting to make a major investment in electrifying or otherwise getting the Department of Defense to invest in renewable energies and the use of renewable energies like solar and wind, as well as investing in biofuels for the use of especially in aviation. We lost some momentum on that. We lost some momentum the last 4 years, but we're gaining some of that momentum back under the new administration. So I think you'll need to look at the defense budget this year, look at it last year, and see how we're making an investment in those changes to address those concerns you have.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering that question. And yes, I was aware of the fact that that our national security interests, as well as the world, is impacted by climate change, and that they're aware of that. So that's good to know, and hopefully they'll take stronger and active measures to make changes. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks for calling. I appreciate it. Hey, I think that's the last question, and I want to give our guests a brief moment to wrap up with any of your thoughts, and we'll start with Dr. Jason Vogel.
I hadn't really thought about a pithy closing comment, but I suppose I just am enthusiastic to hear that so many people dialed in to an event that you sponsored, Representative Larsen, that's kind of focused on Earth Day and the environment. And I think that this is the kind of thing that encourages me to continue the work that I do and that my colleagues do, is when passionate citizens who care about the environment and care about our impacts on it are engaged in policy and talking with decision makers and trying to make a difference. So keep up the good work. Thanks.
Oh, thank you very much. And thanks for joining us tonight. Allison Camden.
Yeah, thank you. This was really fun and just such a great opportunity. I really appreciate it. The one thing I didn't mention earlier that I should have in talking about, a roadmap to combating climate change is our plan for electrifying ferries. So for WashDOT as a state agency, our biggest source of GHG emissions is our ferry system, as far as, the emissions that the agency is putting out. It's also a big part of the transportation system in the 2nd Congressional District. So we're really excited to have the funding both in the federal infrastructure package along with funding the legislature just provided in connecting Washington to be able to electrify 4 more vessels and get in some of the charging infrastructure at the ferry terminal. So we've got the plan in place and we're cobbling together the money, and I think that's really going to make a difference, particularly in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're very excited about both electric transit and electric ferries here in the North Puget Sound. Appreciate it. Well, I'll end by just thanking our guest, Deputy Assistant Secretary Allison Camden of the State Department of Transportation, and as well Dr. Jason Vogel of the UW Climate Impacts Group, Deputy Director of that group. Thank you so much, and I want to thank the now about 419 people still on the call for coming on and staying on as well, importantly enough. And just remind, Joe, could you remind people again what they can do next? Get a newsletter or leave a message?
Of course. I want to echo Representative Larsen and thank the 3,700 plus people who joined us, and to Zenda in Bellingham and Tyler and Joyce and LaConnor and everyone else was unable to get their question in tonight. You have an opportunity to leave a voicemail after this event ends. You can press *6 on your telephone keypad to add yourself to Representative Larsen's e-newsletter, and you can get reminders for future telephone town halls. Like I said, if we weren't able to get to your question tonight, you can leave a voicemail right after you stop hearing our voices. You can send us an email at rick.larsen@mail.house.gov, or you can call our office at 425-252-3188. I will also direct you to Representative Larsen's website, Larsen, that's Larsen with an E, .house.gov. And if you go to the website, scroll to the bottom of the page, there is more contact information for the district office. But with that, we want to thank everyone again, and we hope everyone has a good rest of their Thursday evening.
And a happy Earth Day tomorrow. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming on. Goodbye.